Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Also, a big thank you to Hugh Barron at James Eady for the lovely email I got saying loved the episode of the show. Always appreciate your feedback. And I guess this is it at the end of the day, isn't it? You know, I wouldn't say sort of independent bottling companies kind of work in a bubble per se, but you know, a lot of the time they sell their whiskies, shops purchase it, customers purchase it, and I guess a lot of the time they don't ever find out about what customers think about, you know, their products unless they're reviewed or people tell them, you know. And I mean, this is one of the things that I like about doing whiskey tastings, is that you get the feedback there and then. You know, you select a number of different bottlings because you think they're intriguing or they're good or whatever, and you know, everybody has you know, well, not everybody has a comment to make, but a lot of people sort of will let you know what they think about these kind of whiskies, and you get this interesting feedback. You know, sometimes it's you know, surprising, sometimes not so surprising, you know. But anyway, it's always nice to get a little bit of feedback, and the same from you guys. You know, if you're enjoying what I'm doing or not enjoying it or whatever, you know, it's always nice to have feedback. It's always nice when it's when it's congratulatory or what have you. Not so much fun when it's anyway. Also, as per usual, of course, any comments that I do make during today's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me. Right, okay, so today's episode of the show. Right, Mortlach. Haven't done an episode of Mortlach for a while, and it's an intriguing distillery, and part of the reason I wanted to do this episode of the show is I got hold of a sample of new make, basically, when Graham Mackay left Morrison Distillers and went to go and work for Ardner Merkin, he was clearing his desk out and discovered he had this sample bottle of Mortlach new make, and said, "Do you want it?" And I thought, well, yeah, why not? You know, I've never tasted new make Mortlach, and I always love to taste new make spirit because, as I say, more often than not, it gives you the sort of, it's the DNA of the whiskey. It's you know, you can see the character of the spirit with no interference from anything else, and it gives you that, you know, you don't get the opportunity to do so very often, so it does kind of give you an insight into these into the character of the spirit. And I mean, as we well know, Mortlach is very well renowned for the use of its sherry casks, and that kind of leads into probably the last notable thing that happened to the distillery, which was back in 2014, which we shall call Macallan Gate, I guess, for want of a better word, or Screw Up Gate, I guess, if you're more that way inclined. For those of you that don't know or can't remember, it was all basically about Diageo, the owners of the distillery, deciding that they wanted to reposition the brand. Horrendous marketing speak, isn't it? But I'm afraid, you know, the whiskey industry certainly is full of that at times. And basically, they wanted to put it up against Macallan. So, in their infinite wisdom, they decided to withdraw the bottling that was available at the time, which a lot of people loved, the old Flora and Fauna bottling. I mean, it was sherried, it was all right. It was a bit like their Blair Athol bottling, you know, so all right. So they. Decanters, lavish bottles, lots of PR, all that kind of malarkey, and out comes this new range. Now this new range, and we're talking back in, this is what, 7 years ago now, consisted of a no-age statement bottling called Old Rare Old, an 18-year-old and a 25, along with a travel retail bottling called Special Strength. Now, the recommended retail prices were 55, 180, 600 quid for the 25-year-old and 75 quid for the travel retail bottling, which, all right, you kind of look at and go, that's a bit steep. I mean, you know, like I said, consider this was 7 years ago, and, you know, they're trying to sort of big up Mortlach as a luxury whiskey akin to Macallan. Now, with the best will in the world, Mortlach obviously has a history, not doubting that, but it really doesn't have the cachet of Macallan, does it, at the end of the day? And now I suppose, like I said, going back to the pricing, it would have been okay if the bottles had been 70 CLs. For some God only knows reason, Diageo decided to bottle everything in 50 CL bottles. So 600 quid for a 25-year-old 50 CL bottle. I mean, dear God, what planet were these people on? And obviously a lot of people were really upset about this. And Diageo still didn't, well, they sort of kind of realised and half-assed admitted that they'd screwed up. The official statement, which is pure marketing guff, is we have now rethought the range, and this is our response to that feedback. We are confident that this outstanding new liquid, which is bold in flavour and will deliver success for the brand moving forwards. No mention of, sorry guys, we were trying to screw you here. But anyway, I suppose it's like politicians, isn't it? You know, whenever they get caught out, you know, they try and put a spin on it, don't they? So, and Diageo tried to sort of make out that they were, a lovely, fluffy, lovely sort of listening kind of company, rather than some kind of, you know, corporate behemoth that actually gave, well, you know. So anyway, they did indeed, to their credit, I will add, you know, bring a new range, all bottled at in 70 CL bottles. So there was a 12-year-old, a 14, a 16 and a 20-year-old. Price range, RRPs range from $49.95 for the 12-year-old up to just under 200 quid for the 20-year-old. So a lot better pricing structure there, you know. And that was it. That was all the last we heard from all that business, and things have kind of, I suppose, not having any direct dealings with Diageo or the distillery, one assumes that sort of there has been nothing else, and they've just carried on their own sort of merry little way. Now, the other reason for looking at Mortlach, and especially the new make, is that it has a bit of a, I suppose, unique distillation process, which I have to refer to my notes because it is quite complex. So basically, they have a selection of stills. They have 6 3 wash and 3 spirit stills. So wash still number 3 and spirit still number 3 work in tandem. So that's pretty much straightforward. And then the low wines from stills 1 and 2 are split with what they call the heavy faints, strong faints, sorry, which is essentially the heads. They're run off and collected separately from the what they call the weak faints. So. Excuse me, stuff at effectively the tails. So these are 2 split off, and then so the strong faints are then used as the charge for still number 1, spirit still number 1, with the low faints going into spirit still number 2, which is known, no sorry, other way around, spirit number 2. Told you I had to write it down, but I can't even. Anyway, so yeah, so spirit still number 1 takes the weak faints, and it's called the wee witchy, and and in that smaller still, obviously the weak faints are then triple distilled. Everything's all then blended sort of back together, and I believe the new make comes out at around about somewhere 71-72% ABV. Now, I did see a while ago that the distillery had bottled a bottling called the Wee Witchy, and I thought for 1 minute they had actually done something really intriguing and bottled effectively a triple distilled Mortlach that all came off the still, the Wee Witchy, but they hadn't. It's just a name they'd given it for some reason or other. But anyway, so Most of the stills are fairly tall neck. They run them fairly quickly. Worm tub condensers to get a nice oily, sulphury kind of new make spirit, which, as people tend to say, is a very traditional style of spirit, but I don't tend to find it's in the traditional style of, say, some of the like Glengoyne and Glenlachie and those kind of spirits. So it's kind of like, yeah, ideally suited to sherry, but for today's episode of the show, there is no sherry at all. We're all American oak casks, whether refill or first fill or whatever, because I basically want to see what the character of the spirit is. I mean, it has this wonderfully complex distillation process, and well, I don't want to mask it all in cherry. I want to sort of see what it actually produces at the end of the day, and having a bit of new make as well is always good fun. Anyway, so I think I've waffled enough now. I think it's just time to take a look at today's one. Like I said, we're going to kick off with the new make, and like I said, I don't know there's certainly no mention of the ABV on the little label, but I believe it is somewhere in the region of 71 to 72% ABV. So have a little drop of water here, waiting. Then we're going to move on to a Douglas McGibbon Provenance 8-year-old. This is a refill bourbon hoggy. It was distilled in November of 2006, bottled in July of 2015, and the cask number DMG 10695. So next bottling we're moving on to, again, refill bourbon hoggy. This was a 12-year-old bottled in Douglas Lang's old particular range, bottled at 48.4%, distilled in November of 2006 and bottled in February of 2019, and the cask number DL 13085. Now, next bottling we're moving on to is a 14-year-old James MacArthur bottling. Now, some of you might have noticed that the title page looks a little bit odd. Now, this particular bottling, although I only ever received this sample, having done some digging, I could only find reference to it being bottled in miniatures. So obviously the picture is a miniature on the title page, or the title image, but it's not to scale, because obviously it would look completely bizarre, so I have kind of like blown that miniature bottle up somewhat. So this was a James MacArthur Fine Malt Selection Mortlach. It was 14 years old, bottled at 45%. Distilled in 1996 and bottled in 2010. So, like I said, I've only found a mention of it bottled in miniatures, not in any other size of bottle. So, anyway, it'd be interesting to see what that one's like. Then we're going to move on to an AD Rattray, or a Dewar Rattray, 17-year-old, single bourbon cask 3426. Distilled in June of 1995, bottled in January of 2013 at 58.4%. And the last bottling we'll be looking at today is a 23-year-old. Again, bourbon hogshead, number 4124. It was bottled by Carn in their celebration of the cask range, distilled in July of 1995 and bottled in April of 2019 at 52.4%. So nice spread of age statements, so hopefully we will see how the spirit progresses over time, aged in American oak. So I'm really quite looking forward to this, even though, like I said, this is not the first episode of the show I've done on Macallan, oh good God, no, on Mortlach. So yeah, let's taste it. Never know why I desire you, you're in my mind. Right, okay, so let's see what the new make gives us on the nose then, shall we? Heavy, quite sulphury, biscuity, a little bit of cabbage, but There's some fragrant barley, a little bit of cereal, biscuits. I'm even getting some floral notes, some sort of touch of almost kind of lilies. Now, it's a lovely spirit in actual fact, and I'm guessing that the triple distilled spirit is what's giving it that slightly higher tone to it. So it's giving it that slight floral note, which is quite interestingly counterbalancing the more weightier, oilier, sulphury notes. It's probably not as sulphury as I was expecting, possibly down to the fact that part of this is triple distilled, and I think it works out that they say that the spirit works out being 2.81 distillations or something bizarre like that. Don't know how they figured that one out, but anyway, yeah, it's an intriguing new make. It has to be said. It's not rough like some of the sherried monster distilleries. It's actually a beautiful spirit in actual fact, I think. Really nicely balanced. Let's see what the palates are. Again, slightly cabbagey, sulphury, heavy, oily, not very long, plenty of alcohol, obviously. But there's some sweet barley notes there. There's an intimation of honey, and again, one often tends to find that with these heavier sulphury new makes, that sulphur note does become quite honeyed over time. So I'm kind of hoping that the 23-year-old will kind of display that characteristic. It's a bit raw, cereally, biscuity, but really intriguing. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to the nose. Okay, so it's not quite so sulphured now. It's a little soapy, it has to be said. It's brought out the sweetness as well. It's got a kind of again, that sort of high toned, sort of not totally triple distilled. Certainly, it's not triple distilled sort of notes, as in sort of Auchentoshan with that sort of rose petally Turkish delight kind of character. But it has an aromatic fruitiness, although again has that weight, that oily body, and that slight sort of soapiness. But let's see what the palate's like now. Again, less sulphured, more cereally, more barleyed. Got a lovely kind of natural character. Again, I'm getting more of that kind of latent honey note there. Again, it's got a lovely mouthfeel. It's oily, it's rich. Not hugely meaty, it has to be said. But yeah, really, really intriguing. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops. Okay, so moving on to the 8-year-old Provenance bottling. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, quite a natural note. Not quite as aromatic and high toned. We've got more barley. The cask is obviously influencing this. I'm getting vanilla. There's a little bit of tight tannin, but it's quite malty. A little bit of granulated sugar. I mean, that's a pleasant nose. That's a really nice 8-year-old spirit. Again, like I said, really natural character. Not hugely complex. It's getting a little aromatic now. Certainly if you move your nose away from the glass a little, it's a little bit more aromatic. But and there's that sweetness there as well, more barley sweetness than honey. So it parts on. Weighty, full, oily, barley, touch of almost kind of baked sour fruit, a touch of banana, a little bit of vanilla, not a great deal of oak on the palate, a little bit of spice coming through on the finish. So you're certainly getting pretty much all the character of the spirit, and it's mellowing out quite, or softening quite nicely, I think. Although in saying that, you know, it wasn't kind of the new make wasn't sort of jarring. Doesn't quite have the floral note of that was on the new make, so maybe the oak is at this kind of age just kind of taking that sort of slight floral note away. But you know, lovely whiskey, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the old particular 12-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Ooh, that's quite floral, quite fragrant. Honeyed, although not sort of hugely honeyed, but a nice level of honey. Quite a lot of American oak as well, quite creamy, almost vanilla ice cream, but there's a touch of white grape, a bit of gooseberry as well. That's quite intriguing, because it doesn't feel as weighty. Certainly the aromas don't feel as weighty as the 8-year-old. We're now starting to, like I said, get a little bit more sort of aromatic sort of fruit notes. It's possible that this might have been this cask, but it certainly doesn't quite have the weight of the 8-year-old. But still, that's a lovely nose. Getting very oaky now, probably a little too oaky. That sort of vanilla ice cream note is becoming quite dominant, but yeah, there's still some citric notes there, some lemon that kind of is kind of balancing it out. So we'll pass on. Lovely progression. Starts off quite citric in actual fact, quite fresh. White fruits, apricot, a little bit of honey. Oak sort of moves in sort of on the mid palate, quite creamy, but that lemony sort of acidity kind of just balances it up and stops it becoming overly oaky on the finish. And there's a little bit of honeysuckle, a little bit of apricot coming back. Like I said, not quite as weighty as the 8-year-old. It does feel slightly more aromatic, slightly more honeyed. Maybe it's just the cask variation. Maybe this is how the spirit is maturing. You know, it goes from being quite dense and weighty at sort of a relatively young age, and then starts to become lighter as we go along. Possibly. We'll find out when we get to the next bottling, which is just a couple more years old. So nice. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 14-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's kind of, yeah, yes, I can see the progression. Maybe a little bit more perfumed fruit, a little bit more honeyed, maybe a little bit more aromatic. There's a little bit of cereal, some earthiness there. Not a huge amount of oak. Again, I would suggest a fairly well used cask or casks. I don't know whether the fine malt selection was a single cask bottling or whether it was a batch bottling. I mean, that is a lovely nose. Got a little bit of weight to it as well. Bit of sort of brittle honey and vanilla. It's starting to show a little bit of sawdust there, right on the edge. So we're getting a little bit of maturity coming through from the oak. And again, like I said, it's less weighty than the 8-year-old, and we are slightly more floral, slightly more aromatic. Let's see what pass on. Now, strangely, the palate tastes a lot younger, which is bizarre. Almost kind of gristy, malty, slightly dense, slightly more weighty. Again, it's got that brittle honey note. It's a bit short, a bit kind of pleasant, I would say. And like I said, it's just that disconnect between the nose and the palate is quite noticeable. I was expecting, you know, the palate to have that sort of aromatic sort of fruit character, but it's strangely kind of subdued, really. So it's kind of like the nose is kind of, yes, I can see the progression is there. The palate seems to have kind of gone backwards into this kind of more kind of weighty, oily, sort of malty, young fashion. So it's intriguing, interesting. Yeah, that's whiskey for you. Feel it burn so hard deep inside of me. Right, okay, so let's move on to the AD Rattray 17-year-old. So this is bottled at 58.4% single cask bottling. Oh, that's an oak fest and a half, it has to be said. Really big, really bourbony, big toffee, big barley, big spices, big, it's big, okay? Yeah, that's voluptuous, that's huge. Kind of can't say I'm getting the elegance of the spirit, shall we say. It has been kind of like stamped on by the jackboot of oak, but it does kind of, it seems to have sort of, you know, like I said, it's just brought out this kind of big barley, big spice, big toffee. It's a sort of hasn't kind of like fit the progression, it has to be said, and that's basically because, you know, it's such a huge amount of oak that it's really difficult to sort of say where the spirit is at with regards to its progression. It's pretty much like dumping it into sherry at the end of the day. It's so overwhelming, the character of the spirit, that, but obviously there are people that like this kind of style, and yeah, let's see what that's like. It would be no surprise if I told you the palate pretty much moved in exactly the same kind of way. Quite oaky, not quite oaky, big, very oaky. Cream custard, sort of bourbon, vanilla. I get a semblance of barley, I get a little bit of citrus. There's maybe some grass there. It's quite difficult to sort of see where the spirit is at this sort of at this age. And like I said, it goes to show that spirits, whiskies, you know, can be very, you know, can fall foul to the, you know, the overactive cask. And yeah, it's an impressive whiskey. I mean, you know, if you took it as a standalone and you like a lot of oak in your whiskey, it's impressive. It's big. It's full. I'll put a little drop of water with it. I mean, it may well mitigate some of the oak, possibly. But let's see. Yeah, it has a touch. There's a little bit more of that kind of tangerine-y kind of orangey kind of character. Again, quite sugary. I'm getting sort of granulated sugar, so quite sweet. And it doesn't really kind of like follow in the line of the previous bottlings, and it just goes to show that even with a little drop of water, the oak has kind of, should we say, interfered with the distillery character. Let's see what the parts like. Again, quite sugared, weighty, a little bit more spirit character, but again, I'm not really. It's only when you take. I mean, this is the thing. You know, if you taste, and I like a lot of the time, I am tasting these kind of as they are, rather than sort of in a flight, shall we say. And tasting it, you know, it's a pleasant whiskey if you like a lot of oak, but it just goes to show how it kind of doesn't fit in with this kind of like this flight at the moment. You know, the oak has really kind of impinged upon the character of the spirit, and I don't know where it's at, you know, at all at 17. So interesting at the end of the day, I think. Okay, so moving on to the final bottling of the day. This is the celebration of the Cask 23-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's gorgeous. We're back to the aromatic end of the spectrum, but aromatic and richness and honey. Apple, tangerine, cinnamon, honeysuckle. Gosh, beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. Mature, sawdusty oak, touch of pear, a little bit more spice. I mean, that is just a stunning nose. And it just goes to show that this is, you know, ignoring the AD Rattray bottling, the curve is kind of almost complete. It is shown that obviously over time, you know, the weightiness does kind of drop off a little bit. It becomes a little bit more aromatic, but then obviously at 20 odd years of age, the honey is kicking in. You chuck in a bit of sawdusty American oak, and damn, that's a bloody good spirit. That really is. You know, why hide that under, you know, a load of sherry? It kind of beats me. I mean, I can understand taking sort of, you know, the more industrial style of spirit and sort of hiding that under sherry, but when you have a beautiful spirit like this, I just don't get it, don't understand it. So you have to be thankful for the independents for bottling this kind of stuff, although I must admit I've not seen a huge amount of Mortlach from the Indies of recent times. Anyway, let's taste this. That's gorgeous. Beautiful, honeyed, weighty mouthfeel, but delicate as well. The floral fruits kind of come through. Apricot, tangerine, apple. Lovely oiliness to it again, but it's just balanced. It's harmonious. There's a touch of sawdusty oak. And it just goes to show how good the spirit, and well, I think the entire tasting has shown how the quality of the spirit that comes off the stills at Mortlach is. And you just have to go and find it in the independent sector if you really want to understand and, you know, get the character of the spirit, because obviously this Diageo in its infinite wisdom just basically goes, we want another Macallan clone, we want to chuck loads of sherry at it, which is fine. Got no problem with that, but that spirit is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Right, okay, so a big thank you to AD Rattray, to Morrison Distillers, to Douglas Laing and Douglas McGibbon, well, Douglas Laing, Douglas McGibbon, same company really, for the samples for today's episode of the show. I think it's been really intriguing. It's kind of pretty much gone how I was hoping it was gonna go. I did know that the AD Rattray bottling was a bit on the oaky side, but it's been a while since I tasted it, so it was kind of, I thought it was intriguing. So the new make Mortlach, it's not industrial at all, so it's not your kind of like your Dufftown, your Glenrothes, all that kind of, it's not like that at all, and it works beautifully in American oak, as we have seen. So at a young age, at 8 years old, it's showing that kind of like that weightiness, that maltiness, and by the time it gets to 12 years old, we're starting to see the aromatic, the slightly higher toned fruits coming through, and it's starting to become it's a bloody good spirit to start off with. I say it's starting to become a good spirit. It is just shown to be absolutely gorgeous. And the time it gets to 14-year-old, okay, you know, this maybe been a bit of a quirk. Certainly the nose was following the same kind of pattern that I was expecting, with the palate kind of like was a bit of a harking back to a younger spirit. And the wonderful thing about whiskey is that's it, you know, sometimes it does kind of throw you a complete curveball. And then you have the AD Rattray bottling, which isn't a bad bottling, it's just very, very oaky. And in this kind of tasting, it doesn't kind of like show you where the spirit is at that kind of age statement, because it's just very much impinged by the oak. And then you have sort of like bottlings like the Carn more, the celebration of the cask bottling, which are just absolutely stunning, and you just go, oh, Mortlach is a beautiful spirit and really shouldn't be hampered by sherry. And thankfully, every now and again, a bottling of that kind of calibre turns up. Unfortunately, these days, it's going to cost you quite a considerable amount of money to buy a bottling of that quality and that calibre. But it's just nice to know that they do exist. So, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I think it's been really, really intriguing, and has kind of showed what I was hoping it was going to show. So, until next time, which may be a bit sooner than you might think, good dramming and good afternoon.